cheap ones that you get for, I don't know, 50 bucks or whatever, it still could use a little weight on the bottom. But everything fits real nice on there. And then I made it convertible, if you will. So what's real nice about the ball transfers is I don't have to get this thing really square with the table saw, if you will. But sometimes you prefer to have a roller in the ball transfers. So I made a little alignment on it. So it's going to go in the 2 dowel pins. And then the screws for the ball transfer have captivated so that I don't have to do that. So it was worth the effort to go ahead and make this. It's just nice and handy, and I use it quite a bit more than I did the other ones. Next thing I brought in is some squaring sticks. So the wood's kind of funny to talk about. It's a mahogany or a luan. So it was off of a skid that I saw the wood, I think a little over 50 years that I had carried that around. So real simple. There's just a screw that tightens it down. So you set this up to, if you're doing like a drawer or a cabinet or something, put one end in the corner, and it's just a dado that goes through the middle of it with a rabbet there. It's easy to adjust. You get one side square, you get one side set, and you go to the opposite diagonal. And is it short or is it long? Well, if it's a little too long, then maybe you go split the difference. You start there, and then you start squaring it up. But once you get it set, and if you have 3 or 4 drawers that are all the same, you made them all together. Once this is set, you just, it turns out to be much more accurate than the tape measure that I always use, and it's really simple. So I made 2 of them, and no matter what you make, it's going to be, so I'll get other ones that are, this one isn't long enough. So I haven't made a 3rd one yet, but the 2 so far have been real nice to have.
Steve, what do you have for an angle on the end of that?
What's that?
What do you have for an angle on the end of that?
No, you want to try and get that as close to the middle as you can. That point.
Yep. So the point, what angle is that point at, do you know?
No. I just freehanded it. They're square in this direction. Okay. There should be no, and it's going to go, so I'm going to use the bottom one here and the top one here. And you want to hold it pretty level when you use it, but it's so much quicker than the ruler. And you go, oh, it's about halfway between 13/16 and 7/8. And you go to the other one, and it's one of those silly things that you don't do forever and ever. And it's like, I used one and found out that's really valuable. Now I got to go home and make one. Okay, so the last thing I brought is just so I needed to make a lampshade, and the lampshade needed to fit close to the wall. So I decided to make an oval lampshade, okay, and then worked on different mock-ups. Sometime I'll bring in the 5 different mock-ups, and they're radically different. There's a tendency in one direction, okay, but I really didn't. I embellished it a little bit, and then it's like, no, I don't like it. So finally came up with this design. This design had to work through a lot of different things, so it's coopered. So there's, I believe, 7 pieces. No, 5 here. There's 5 in the front here. There's 2 here, and there's 1 that comes out, actually straight. Okay, so I brought the fixtures along to make most of these. I've got 2 more fixtures at home, 1 to cut this piece and 1 to cut this back piece, okay, that I haven't cut yet. So the fixtures, so the first thing I did, the first fixture is right here. So the only thing important about this is I needed that shape. And it's not symmetrical. There it
One of
fits.
those shapes.
There it fits. So I needed this shape because I needed to bend this part. Okay, so starting off with this shape, and I would use double sticky tape. I'll back up just a little bit. So the drawing would have this view on it, and I've always, really old school, so I'd always use tracing paper. Well, I didn't have tracing paper or carbon paper. That's my go-to, if you will, but I didn't have it. So this is tracing paper that I just glued on to 3/8 inch MDF. Okay. I used double sticky tape here and here, and I put a piece of 3/4 inch MDF on it, and I had to make it this wide. So this is my bending form. So the bending form is, it needs to be all in one surface, and so to bend it, what I used is I used bending ply. Anybody in here try bending ply? None has. So it's 1/8 inch bending ply. I wanted to end up with 1/4 inch. Okay, so I could buy some commercial veneer that was 1/16 of an inch thick. And here I'm going to lie a little bit. So I called Certainly Wood to get some 16th inch walnut. Oh no, they don't have 16th inch, they have 1/18 of an inch. So instead of 0.0625, it was 0.056. So it's like, no big deal, just keep going. So I glued up these that were about 6.5 inches wide with the bending ply in there, and then a piece of walnut in a vacuum bag. So just put it in a vacuum bag, sucked it down. And I had 2 of these forms, and it took me 4 days. I think I had to do 10 or so of them. Lampshades get a little complicated because you don't have one, you have 2. So then it was on to making the forms. So as Craig talked about, or as Mark talked about, cutting the 22.5 degree miter, you have the same problem with these. So I need to cut these angles. So I looked at my drawing and I measured the angle, and I needed to cut 3.6 degrees. So that turns out you have to subtract that from 90, so it's 86.4 degrees. So I set the table saw. It should back up a little bit more. I had to go with the table saw, so we had a 10-inch saw and a 12-inch saw. I needed clearance. 12-inch saw gave me 3.25 inches. Okay, and the 10-inch saw was about 2 7/8 for height. So I ended up on a 12-inch saw, and I just barely had enough space. So this would cut. I don't have any uncut. And I like toggle clamps because it keeps my hands out of the way. So I would reference that up against the stops over here. So, and then I'd set the tables, I'd set the blade to 86.4 degrees, put my parts in here, cut it. Change the part, I cut this one side, okay? And let me back up a little bit more. So there's 6 fixtures, so I needed to make these blocks again with this same part. I only needed to be 3 inches wide, or 3 thicknesses at 3/4 inch wide. So the first thing I would do is I would cut one at this angle, and I would screw it in to the bottom. And you can kind of see my first one. It's kind of like a woodpecker went at it. Trying to figure out where am I going to put my clamp blocks, what's the angle, all of that. You get to the 3rd or the 4th, and you finally figure out exactly where things have to go. So I cut this block at this angle, and that turned out to be this angle here is from the first cut. It's the same 86.2 degrees. Okay, they're opposite. Okay, so if you look at the 2 of them side by side, you've got a right and a left. So the second one fits in there just perfectly. Okay, because the first ones were straight on the side, and these are all cut. So a little bit about making the jigs. Okay, so started with the MDF. Okay, that was glued together. Little bit, and a lot of people do the same trick. Put a piece of sandpaper here. Okay, and somebody mentioned it. I think you did, John. You put the sandpaper on after you know where your cut's going to be. I took about a $100 router bit and learned my lesson for good. I hit sandpaper, and that router bit was toast. There's no more. There's stops here. There's a stop here. There's a stop down here. So the part will. You want your parts to, especially if you're working with stuff that isn't straight, you want it to really sit in there the same every time. It has to if it's going to come together. Toggle clamps. These are from Home Depot, or excuse me, they're from Harbor Freight. They're $4.50 at Harbor Freight, and I won't wear these out in my lifetime. And if you buy, Destaco is the quote-unquote name brand. They're about $35 to $45 for a Destaco clamp. And I'm sure that it's a little bit better than these Harbor Freight ones, but they'll do just as well. So here's the part. It'll go in these 2 spots. So this one is, the jigs are all numbered, number 1 and number 2. So you start off with number 1, then you move to number 2. This is number 1. So number 1's got a straight edge here. It's perpendicular to the back. And then number 2 has got the taper here. These were set at 75.25 degrees, 75.3. So the angle was 14.75, and then you have to subtract it. And these are the same thing. They end up being opposite of each other. You have a left and you have a right. So you end up making a lot of jigs for this. I didn't tape those parts together, but the joint, when I glue them up, you won't see the joint. The joint will be, will pretty much go away. clamping is a little tricky on those parts, so I'll glue some blocks on. I can put two of them together. You can come up, you can see that that joint is just really nice joint. And that's right off the table saw. So, I have a problem that I never like to make things easy for myself. So these, I can clamp these two together with just some pieces, change the angle a little bit, and I can clamp those together. I'm hoping I can get 3 together, okay, and then I'll put the other ones. When I actually make the lampshade, I'm going to change woods. I'm going to go to a real blonde wood. In fact, I'd like to bleach it. I'd like to get it as close to white as I can get it. And then I don't like this exposed plywood there, so I've got to deal with that. So I think what I'll do when I make the final ones is I'll use a real blonde wood. I'm going to use English sycamore. And then I'm going to probably get a darker wood on the top and on the bottom. And I'll probably go with Peruvian walnut on that. So it's a darker walnut than our American walnut. So I'll put this in the second one. These holes here are where the screws were. This hole here is where the screw came in through the bottom. You have to be mindful where they are so you don't cut into them.
So you're starting with wider pieces before you do anything?
So they were 2 inches wide.
Okay.
And
Your jig is cutting both the taper and the angle at the same time?
So the question was, I cut the angle and the taper at the same time. So yes and no. So, and it only took me about 20 to 30 minutes of discussion for finally to go into my brain. So if you're working with flat parts that are flat, you actually, and you're going to cooper them, you're going to tip your blade at one angle, and you're going to move your board at a different angle, 2 different angles, okay? And what helped me, okay, so when I did this line here on the back is where these had to be in order to get this angle in there. So the top, and I know you can all see it, the top is wider than the bottom. That's because the blade is sitting like that. So now all I have to do is make sure I get my distance so the part really gets cut off. Actually, it's really close there. Probably about those locations. Okay? So now I need to know what is the distance from here to the bottom there, and from there to the bottom. My drawing shows me that. I'm able to measure that as long as I control this width.
So you're cutting a compound angle.
So it ends up being a compound angle by tipping it, okay, to this angle, 75.25 degrees, and the part is not straight across, it's at a different position to start with. You look at that. That was a 5-minute discussion, and she laughed and she goes, "No, longer 5 minutes than we thought." So it probably took me about, you say, "You understand?" "No." "You understand?" "No." And finally, when she moved her hand and tipped the blade and said, "It's wider at the top than the bottom," and it's like, bango. So real difficult thing for me to visualize. We all have different abilities of that, but, and then once I went through it, it'll be, so the fixtures are nice enough that the work is done. Okay, I can change the species of wood and I can go back. It'll get a little bit more complicated when I want to try and, I think I'll put a little insert in here with the same wood. So, but the fixtures are no different.
Make a fixture for the table saw, move it across the blade at an angle and make a little dado in there. and insert your
You
piece.
could, that could be a solution.
So you have to get a square tip blade.
Something where they'll make little, for segmented turning, they'll make the angles exactly right, that's another solution. So, and that's one of the things that we're fortunate enough to be able to do, is there's many solutions that we get to think about all night as we try and do it. Oh, I forgot one more thing. So, if you come and look at this, so right in here is hot glue. So all this stuff is put together with hot glue. So the hot glue will cool, and once it's cool, it'll stay in place long enough that I can drill and countersink all these other screws and screw it in from the bottom. The screws hold it, and if you're concerned about it, you can put a little glue underneath it, but the hot glue holds them in place as you're trying to figure out, put them in the right position until you use it.
And your jigs are made out of MDF, which is just inherently stable too. Nice choice.
Yeah, the MDF is